Choosing between the base chip MacBooks is the most difficult it's ever been, thanks to the M4 bringing truly pro-level power to all of the base chip MacBook options, which is why in this video we're going to be comparing the 14-inch MacBook Pro and the 13 and 15-inch MacBook Airs in order to help you decide which form factor or model is right for you. Okay, so first up, let's discuss the design differences here. I mean, both are pretty similar, you know, they share similar Apple design language, but there are some key and pretty obvious differences, although I'll say them anyway. The Air, as the name suggests, is slimmer and trimmer and lighter and all of that, whereas the Pro is, you know, thicker, heavier, clunkier, albeit a bit more robust. It feels like a little more sturdy, but both are really solid and have that Apple fit and finish, you know, mostly metal, some plastic. You know, what you expect when you pay MacBook money for one of these devices. As for the color options though, the MacBook Air gives you a few more, so two more options. You get silver, starlight, midnight, and this exclusive sky blue, which I really enjoy. I'm normally a silver guy because I like subtle, light colors, but this is like the best of both worlds in terms of subtlety and flair, so great color there. If you want this, you know, you're gonna have to buy a MacBook Air. Whereas the MacBook Pro only comes in two color variants or shades more so, silver, which is classic, and an exclusive space black, which I think looks really cool. Another design or color difference here, and this is not new news, but I have to mention it. The MacBook Pro has a blacked out keyboard. This is more apparent on the silver and previous gen space gray models, whereas with the MacBook Air, you have a more traditional look where the aluminum surrounding the keys is color matched with the rest of the chassis. I mean, it's all one piece, like the keyholes are like punched out, so they don't paint the surrounding aluminum or the aluminum surrounding the keys. So if that's a design element that you want, you're gonna have to go with the MacBook Pro, but if you don't care either way, the MacBook Air might be for you, but both look pretty nice, although I will say the MacBook Pro looks pretty clean with that blacked out keyboard, but some people disagree. But something keyboard related that all of these laptops have in common is, of course, the keyboard itself. The Apple Magic Keyboard is standard and has been standard across all MacBook models, low-end and high-end, for quite some time now, and it's one of the best out there in terms of its look and feel, tactility, travel, spacing, and also the implementation of Touch ID, which is a must-have for unlocking your favorite websites and other things without even a second thought, just a touch of your finger. However, I will say the typing experience is a bit better with the MacBook Air, simply because the MacBook Air is slimmer, so it doesn't rise as much off of a table, so your wrist is not cutting into the edge as much. The trackpad situation is a bit different though. I mean, they all work and function the same. You know, they have the same Force Touch or, you know, tactile technology that Apple uses, but the 13-inch MacBook Air and the 14-inch MacBook Pro have a similarly sized trackpad. I think one of them is taller, the other one's longer. I don't know which is which. I'll probably show that in B-roll, but for all intents and purposes, they're about the same, you know, so you have just enough space to, you know, scroll through, do your gestures, all that. Whereas with the 15-inch MacBook Air, much like the more expensive 16-inch MacBook Pro, you get a really expansive trackpad, a bit larger, so that's nice if you're doing a lot of scrolling and gestures and just, you know, using macOS on the go a lot. I prefer having a bigger trackpad if I'm using a laptop in laptop mode. Otherwise, I'd be using a, you know, external trackpad, which you can buy from Apple, but that would be with the desktop. So you kind of get the full-size trackpad experience almost with the 15-inch MacBook Air here without having to upgrade to a more expensive 16-inch MacBook Pro. However, the MacBook Pro strikes back with superior connectivity, which is the next thing we're going to talk about here. And unlike previous gen models, the M3, M2, and M1 versions, we now get 3 total USB-C or Thunderbolt ports, up from 2, which means you get one on the other side of the laptop, which is a big deal if you want to, you know, hook up a display over there or a USB-C hub or a drive. So if you're someone that's hooking a lot of stuff up to your laptop, this is a big deal. And having an extra USB-C or Thunderbolt port was an exclusive feature with the M Pro models, so M3 Pro, M2 Pro, and M1 Pro, so now you don't have to spend an extra $500 or so to get that extra port, which again is a big deal if you're hooking a lot up to your laptop. But again, and on the flip side, you only get 2 USB-C or Thunderbolt ports with the MacBook Air here, which is a bit unfortunate. I wish there was an extra one, but Apple's got to sell you the Pro somehow, of course. And also, I'm sure they, you know, determined that people who use the MacBook Air are not hooking up as much stuff to their laptop. I digress, but it's not really that big of an issue for 2 reasons. Number one, these are Thunderbolt 4 ports, so you can really expand, you know, each port and what it's doing with the bandwidth. So you can plug in a, you know, Thunderbolt dock or a USB-C hub and just like really connect more port to your laptop if you really need to. But it's also less of an issue here now that we have MagSafe, or have had MagSafe, so you don't have to give up a port to charge like you used to with the previous gen MacBook Pros and Airs. So both laptops have this feature. It's not new news, but that, you know, sort of makes the two port situation here forgivable. At least it's not one port like with the 12-inch MacBook, but that's another story. But yeah, I really don't have an issue here with these ports because of the way I use the laptop. However, if it was my only, I would definitely be missing a single port. But again, Thunderbolt 4 is pretty expandable. But having an extra port with the MacBook Pro, especially on the other side of the laptop, is very convenient. So you cannot discredit it there. And just like how MagSafe preserves one of your USB-C ports for non-charging purposes, the MacBook Pro packs another punch here with regard to connectivity with the HDMI port that's built in, which can preserve another one of your USB-C ports for non-display purposes. And it gives you the flexibility to hook up to displays and TVs and projectors, you know, out the box, you know, no adapter. You can designate a port on here purely for connecting to a display of any kind, you know, so more flexibility there, while again preserving one of your precious Thunderbolt ports. So you're preserving two ports here with the MacBook Pro and one port with the MacBook Air. So connectivity-wise, the MacBook Pro is, you know, winning this with flying colors. And before I forget here, we also have, I almost thought it was on the other side, the SD card reader, which is a must-have if you are a content creator or a creative professional, whether you're recording audio, video, photos, whatever. It's really great to have on here, again, without having to pull out a dongle to plug in and also take up one of your precious USB-C ports. All this to say, these laptops have one port commonality that's worth mentioning. They all still have the headphone jack, which is really important if you're doing audio work or if you just want to plug into a wired pair of headphones or speakers or whatever. It's nice having that here. Still, it's a bit old-fashioned, but, you know, of course the Pro has it because, you know, professionals, you know, have to use some wired audio equipment, but the Air still has it, which is great for the consumer who, you know, may or may not be using wireless audio devices. And speaking of audio, the MacBook Pro strikes back yet again with a more advanced speaker setup here. So we're getting 6 drivers, force-canceling subwoofers, Dolby Atmos, and Apple Spatial Audio support. In layman's terms, you're just getting good bass and punch and clarity and whatever, but you tell me here. I'm sure you've never heard that before. Whereas with the MacBook Air, you're getting a less advanced 4-speaker setup here, 4-driver setup here, that lacks Dolby Atmos, but still has spatial audio. It's also not like oriented the same way. In short, it's just not gonna have the same clarity and bass and punch. But again, you tell me here what you think. So we're getting like similar volume, especially on the 15-inch here, which I think is a bit louder than the 13-inch, but yeah, like you lack that depth. So like, it's tinny, if that makes sense. Like it sounds like it's coming out of a tin can, whereas like with the Pro, you can like hear the depth, if that makes sense. Maybe you can't hear it through the mic here, but go to the Apple Store, you'll definitely be able to tell. But yeah, I mean, the Air's speakers here, especially the 15-inch models, are good enough for music listening and watching YouTube videos and whatever. You know, obviously, AirPods or headphones are a better choice, but the speakers in here are not bad at all. However, if you're producing music, you're doing anything more serious, or you just want a better, richer experience for consuming your content, the MacBook Pro is definitely the superior choice here. And obviously a 16-inch will do even better, but that's not kind of in the scope of this video. But the 14-inch here is pretty impressive, especially considering it's smaller, physically smaller than the Air here, because usually a bigger device has more room for the speaker drivers to reverberate, but you know, the 14-inch does a really good job here, as you can see. But zooming out a bit here, next up, let's talk about portability. And I'm sure you already know what I'm gonna say, but I'm gonna say it anyway. The MacBook Air wins this category hands down because it's lighter, it's slimmer and trimmer, even in the 15-inch form factor, meaning it's just easier to stow in a bag and also easier to manipulate or maneuver in your daily life when you're setting it down or putting it somewhere. Even still, the MacBook Pro 14-inch is plenty portable, a little more so than the 15-inch due to its smaller footprint, although it is thicker and heavier and clunkier and just not as easy to throw around, although it's not much harder. This is still a pretty light laptop here. You can definitely throw this around and throw it in a bag, but it is beat out by the 13-inch MacBook Air, of course, which has it beat in terms of slimness, trimness, and also it's a bit smaller too. So, you know, the 14-inch Pro here is plenty portable, but the MacBook Air, just by nature, specifically the 13-inch model, wins this category, no questions asked. And speaking of portability or bringing your devices places, maybe while you're traveling, I have a brief message from the people that made today's video possible, EPICKA and their Pulse 45-watt universal travel adapter. They're already pretty well known for making fantastic travel adapters and selling them on Amazon, and held the #1 bestseller spot in the US market's electrical adapters category during both the 2024 Amazon Prime Day and Black Friday Cyber Monday sales days. But this Pulse 45-watt adapter is something special and is absolutely stacked with all the connectors and ports you could possibly need while charging in over 200 countries and regions. Whether you're an international traveler, digital nomad, or adventure enthusiast, the Pulse 45-watt adapter ensures true, sustained power for all your devices, unlike ordinary travel adapters that reduce voltage and compromise performance. With guaranteed reliability, it keeps you powered up anytime, anywhere. First up, since it's one of EPICKA's premium series adapters, it's designed really thoughtfully, is super lightweight and compact, which is a must when traveling. At a closer glance though, you have these push toggles on the side that can reveal and lock in the wall adapter you need. The Pulse 45-watt can plug into walls in the US, Japan, and Australia with the simple tilt of the prongs. You also get UK and EU wall prongs or compatibility as well, again, all in one nifty little package. Moving to the front though, you have a universal input or outlet for any kind of power cord you need to plug in, which is fantastic. And more importantly, in my opinion, you have 4 USB ports to charge with, 2 USB-A and 2 USB-C, which I think is a great mix depending on what you're recharging. Using a single USB-C port for 45-watt charging is no joke either, and you can use 2 USB-C ports or 1 USB-C and 1 USB-A port simultaneously to charge 2 devices, delivering either 20 watts each or 20 watts plus 18 watts of power output. You can also charge your iPhone from 0 to 60% in as little as 30 minutes with this adapter. The power throughput is also managed by their Advanced Power Integration or PI chip, similar to the one built into your iPhone, which ensures exceptional performance, reliability, seamless compatibility, and intelligent power management. And last up, they have a built-in 10 amp fuse and replacement fuse to ensure a high level of safety and functionality during your trip. I'll leave a link to Amazon in the video description if you're interested in checking the product out. Right now, it's available on Amazon in the US for $29.99. You get an additional 20% off with code PULSE20OFF at checkout. But anyway, back to the video here. Next up, I want to talk about the display differences between these laptops, and I would say, if you get my drift, it's sort of a Goldilocks analogy situation, although I think it depends on who you are and what you want out of a laptop. First up, of course, we have the smallest of the laptops here, the 13-inch MacBook Air, which actually has a bigger than advertised display at 13.6 inches diagonally. And again, it's the smallest display here, and it feels kind of small. I mean, don't get me wrong, it isn't like netbook, MacBook Air 11-inch tiny, but it's certainly better suited for doing just one thing at once. Of course, you can plug into an external display, which negates this whole argument, but at least on the go, in the laptop mode that you're sort of, using it in, that's the whole reason of buying a laptop, the portability aspect. Yeah, I don't think it's the best in terms of having 2 windows open at once or side by side. You can do it, it's just not the best experience in my opinion, and I would prefer something bigger, which brings us to the 14-inch MacBook Pro, which is also bigger than advertised at, I think, 14.2 inches diagonally. This is sort of the just right, in the Goldilocks situation, the too cold, too hot, just right. It gives you an extra inch of screen space diagonally, which, makes split screen multitasking a doable thing. I would say you have just enough screen space for UI elements and text to show up and all that. But still, this is not the biggest you can go, which then brings us to the 15-inch MacBook Air, which is personally my just right, although it's not everybody's. It is a wonderful display size, 15.3 inches, so that used to be the display size for the biggest MacBook Pro you could get. And it really does make a difference. You get an extra 1.1 inches diagonally, or 2.1 inches if you're comparing it to the 13-inch. So having two windows open at once is a dream if you want to reference a web page or something else. Maybe you're typing up a document or just cross-referencing stuff. I prefer the 15-inch any day over the other two laptops here. So if screen real estate is a priority of yours, the 15-inch MacBook Air is a no-brainer. If portability is your priority, the MacBook Pro 14-inch or 13-inch will do, albeit you're gonna have to sort of, hone in on your decision with other aspects between these laptops, which we'll discuss. But to no one's surprise, the MacBook Pro strikes back with better display specifications if you care, and if you do, first and foremost, it has a mini LED panel here opposed to a more affordable or less advanced IPS LCD panel found in the MacBook Airs, which means it's a lot brighter, twice as much in bright outdoor conditions as well, and also in creative, applications or whatever where Apple allows you to utilize the full display brightness. They keep it sort of at 500 nits standard, or sorry, 600 nits standard to keep your battery pretty good in terms of screen on time, but you can brute force, get that brightness with a plugin called Vivid. I'm not sponsored by them, I just am telling you to get it if you want to take advantage of the display brightness here, although it will cost you a bit of battery life. But yeah, the display here is much brighter, so much so it makes a difference for me in terms of creative usage and also just outdoor usage or usage in bright environments. So keep that in mind. If brightness is important, the Pro is the way to go. The display is also much sharper too, or noticeably sharper, maybe not much sharper, but sharper to the point where if you care, you will notice it. You also just, again, get better contrast and colors and whatnot, and also refresh rate. This has a 120 hertz refresh rate here, which means your macOS experience is even more buttery smooth when you're dragging windows around and UI elements around and scrolling and dragging and all that. If you care, it's really a big deal, but if you don't, you're not gonna miss it that much. So I would argue, in terms of the display qualities or specs here, brightness is the biggest thing or the most noticeable thing, followed by maybe sharpness or maybe ProMotion or the lack thereof. So if you know what I'm talking about, the Pro might be for you, but if you don't, the MacBook Air is likely more than good enough for you as well, and you're not gonna complain about the lack of fancy schmancy bells and whistles that you get with the Pro's display. Although I will remind you, again, if you're looking for an expansive screen or screen real estate for multitasking, split screen, whatever you want to do, media consumption, obviously the 15-inch MacBook Air wins here, at least if you're comparing it to other M4 equipped MacBook Airs and Pros. Of course, you can opt for the 16-inch MacBook Pro, but that's in a whole nother category in my opinion, and it has a whole nother chip. So again, if you want the big display minus the bells and whistles and whatever, I think the screen real estate is worth it. So much so, I opt for this laptop as my everyday casual / productivity laptop opposed to the 14-inch MacBook Pro, because those extra, specs or the better specs with the Pro's display are not worth the lack of screen real estate and also the clunkier, heavier chassis. There's actually one final display difference that totally slipped my mind when I was scripting and shooting my talking points on camera, and that is the nano-texture option for the MacBook Pro's display, whereas with the MacBook Air, you do not get this option. So as you can see here, we have the glossy display with the MacBook Air and the nano-texture display with the MacBook Pro. This is a $100-ish edition, maybe a little more, maybe 99, I'll have to double check, but it makes a huge difference when you're in an environment with a lot of reflection or glare going on. So as you can see here, the MacBook Pro is taking the reflection from the window like a champ, whereas with the MacBook Air here, you can literally see the details coming from the clouds. So it looks a little odd, I would say, with the MacBook Pro, but when the display is on, it works its magic. So here we go. So as you can see here, especially with the dark UI, you can really still see what's going on here. Of course, there's still some amount of reflection, but it's very dispersed or whatever. Whereas with the MacBook Air, again, you're seeing the whole window in the display here, which is really distracting, especially when you have dark UI. So if you want this, it's not only great for productivity purposes, but also for creative purposes. And it helps when you're outside too, I imagine, when there's a lot more glare coming from the sky and other sources. So I really love this coating, and I really would not buy a MacBook without it. I really wish the MacBook Air had it, so hopefully in the future, that is an addition you can get with it as well. But beyond display differences, next up, let's talk about performance differences. And there are actually, even though all of these laptops have the same M4 chip, there are some clear distinctions we have to draw or talk about so you know know what you're getting yourself into. First and foremost, the 13-inch MacBook Air, at least the cheapest or most affordable one, comes with a imperfect M4 chip or a binned model, meaning that it didn't quite get manufactured perfectly, so they had to disable parts of it. So in this case, you get all of the 10 CPU cores, which is good because you're doing mostly stuff with the CPU anyway. However, the 10 GPU cores are not all there. You only get 8, so 2 of them are disabled. That's the manufacturing defect, and that's why you can get the MacBook Air starting out at $999. And this isn't a big deal for people who are going for this laptop. I don't think they're normally using all of that CPU and GPU horsepower, but if you plan on doing that or you want all of the power for your money, you're gonna have to upgrade to the 512 gig model, which has a perfect or non-binned M4 chip in there. And then you have the 14-inch MacBook Pro, which has a perfect 10-core CPU, 10-core GPU M4 chip. However, it has a fan to cool it off when it's under heavy load, which is important because if you are doing, you know, a heavier task like video editing or 3D rendering or gaming for a longer period of time, you want that chip to perform. So, you know, while you are working away here or gaming away or whatever, the fan will keep the chip cool and keep it performing, you know, almost at 100%. Whereas with the MacBook Air, it is completely silent, which is a plus if you want a completely silent MacBook opposed to your noisy helicopter Intel Mac, which you've maybe had. I remember my MacBook Pro sounding like it was gonna take off when I like opened Zoom or Minecraft. I don't miss those days. But the point is, you don't have a fan here, meaning it is silent, but when you throw a lot at it, the chip has to cool down, and because there's no airflow, it has to throttle itself or reduce its performance by 10 or 20%. So you're not getting all of the power here as you throw a lot at this. So again, if having the most power is important to you at all times, the MacBook Pro is a no-brainer. You have a beefy thermal system in here. That's why it's thicker and heavier and all of that. So if you're gonna be doing, you know, sort of sustained performance-related tasks, I mean, it's in the name, the Pro is a no-brainer. But if you're mostly doing everyday tasks and sometimes intermittent heavier tasks, you know, this should serve you well, no problem. I, for one, edited my initial review of this on here, you know, like Sony 4K clips, you know, high-end stuff. It was a pretty good, you know, experience. I wouldn't say it was perfect. There were a few hiccups, maybe related to performance throttling, but I thought it was great. So I wouldn't say the lack of a fan is necessarily a deal breaker, but if you are constantly working away on your laptop, the Pro is the way to go, and quite possibly an M4 Pro MacBook Pro is the way to go. And I have one more tidbit about the chip or the performance with these laptops here. It's a commonality, actually. I'm really excited that they can all be upgraded to 32 gigabytes of unified memory. It might seem a little overkill, but if you're keeping these for a while, you may want to do that because the RAM does make the system faster. It's like having more desk space to spread papers on and to have stuff, you know, quickly available to use. You can use your internal drive as swap, but you know, not all the drives are equal and they're not all as fast, especially I think with the MacBook Air. I think the MacBook Air has a slower internal drive than the Pro. So, you know, having dedicated RAM available or dedicated unified memory, it does not hurt at all, although you get 16 gigs standard, which has served me really, really well. I've had no issues with that. You know, I'm so happy that Apple upped that standard. 8 gigabytes was not okay at all after a while. So 16 standard has been great. But if you want to go big or go home, you can do that with all 3 of these laptop models here with 32 gigabytes of memory. But with everything said so far, let's finally discuss screen on time or battery life with these laptops, which you would expect to be good since the M4 chip is far more efficient than previous gen chips like the M3, M2, and M1 with its 3nm Gen 2 architecture. But surprisingly, the MacBook Air still gets the same 18-hour screen on time, which is not bad, but I expected a little more, maybe 20 hours, maybe 22 hours. But it makes sense because you get this slim and trim form factor, which doesn't allow you to cram more battery cells into it. So that's why the MacBook Pro here takes the cake with a rated 24 hours of screen on time or video playback. That's how Apple sort of gets their numbers, which are, you know, pretty accurate. I wouldn't say you're gonna get exactly 24 hours here, but definitely more than you're getting with the MacBook Air here. And this is a big deal because, you know, an extra 6 hours technically of screen on time can mean you have more time on your email or for writing or, you know, doing creative work or whatever. Having more battery life is definitely needed if you're doing like sustained performance workloads in Final Cut Pro or 3D modeling or whatever else you're doing. So for casual tasks, this is a win. And of course, for performance-related tasks, this is a must. So if you need the extra screen on time, even though you might like the form factor that you get with the MacBook Air, you have to ask yourself, is it worth the lack of 6 hours of screen on time? Because I think the base MacBook Pro had 24 hours last time as well. So this has been a great battery performer as is. The 14-inch M3 Pro model had like 18 hours of screen on time, up to 22 now. So the MacBook Pros saw some battery increases, but the MacBook Airs not so much. I hope that we see that in the future. But again, 18 hours here, but you get the slim and trim form factor and the portability more so, whereas with the MacBook Pro, sure, it's clunkier and heavier, but you get all of the performance and specs bumps here, but you get actually a decent chunk more of screen on time or battery life. So for me, if this was my only device, I would opt for this, but I will say I've had absolutely no problem with the 15-inch MacBook Air or 13-inch MacBook Air in the past, specifically the 15-inch now, because I'm not like doing anything super crazy with it, and I have it plugged into a display half the time too, so it's always charged, but still, I've never had battery anxiety with the MacBook Air. But if I was doing everything with it, including some heavier creative tasks, I definitely would, which is why I would opt for the MacBook Pro 14-inch here. It actually has the same battery life as the 16-inch MacBook Pro, which has a beefier chip that's more power hungry, so I think that's really impressive. But anyway, you really can't go wrong with either, but I will say you need to keep in mind what your usage case is, and I think that will allow you to make the best choice. So again, with everything said, including my thoughts on battery life, which laptop should you go with? Again, you really have to think about what you're doing, your needs, you know, where you're gonna be using this. Is it gonna be plugged in? Do you have a lot of stuff plugged into it? Do you care about display quality? Do you care about portability? Do you care about the SD card reader? It's sort of a math problem that I can't necessarily do for you, but generally I will say, again, if you're somebody who's a power user, you really wanna get the most out of your laptop experience here. Out of the M4 equipped MacBooks, I would say go with the Pro. However, if you want the screen real estate, you want the portability, you want the affordability, the MacBook Air is a stellar choice. It's honestly the best selling laptop, I think, or one of them right now, and that's no surprise to me. So you're getting quite a bit here, including the M4 chip, which brings literally MacBook Pro, M3 Pro level power from previous years without the extra money or hefter bulks. And that's what, again, makes this comparison difficult. The MacBook Air is sort of in Pro territory now. It just lacks some Pro features, which you may or may not need. So hopefully in this video, I have gone over everything thoroughly enough to help you do that math and figure out what you want. Leave me a comment about what you think or what you're going for. And again, check out my link to EPICKA Tech and their Pulse 45 watt travel adapter. It's a pretty cool piece of tech, and I plan on using it if I go to Germany or the UK or wherever else in the next year or two, who knows. And that about wraps things up here. I hope this video was helpful. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And as always, I'm Noah, and I will catch you all in the next one.